There's a bluegill. Tell you what, this is shallow water, late ice. And you can see the reeds behind me, but we're not in very much water, but weeds are the key right now. And I tell you what, whenever you have good water visibility, chances are you're gonna have a lot of weeds in a lake, but fishing weeds is obviously a #1 pick for looking for panfish, but there's a lot to fishing weeds. We're gonna share some of that with a great panfish angler by the name of Tony Mariotti on today's show.
There's one, another nice gill. You know, nice gill. You know, finding these areas of green weeds really makes all the difference in the world. This is late ice and these fish are getting ready to spawn up in the weeds, and as we'll show you, just 40 yards away, you can see the weeds sticking up out of the ice, and right now we're just fishing the edge, 7-8 feet, and below us is bright green weeds. The weeds are making all the difference.
You know, and the whole key at late ice with weeds is just trying to find weeds that are still green. Oh, there's a nice crappie there. Yeah, that is a dandy right there. Isn't that a beauty? Look how thick that fish is. And what can really help is an underwater camera. A lot of times, some really good panfish anglers that I know, they'll use an underwater camera just to scout. Look for weeds that are still green, look for weeds that are standing tall, and just get a general feel of the layout down below. And if you can find green weeds in that sea of brown, that's usually going to be where the fish are at. But that really fine-tunes the location. But that's a dandy there. We'll get that fish in the water.
After a long, cold winter with heavy snow, like the winter of 2013, much of the aquatic vegetation has browned up and broken down by late ice on many northern Midwest natural lakes. At late ice, panfish will sometimes use the cover of weeds that are brown and down if oxygen levels are sufficient. But if there are any green weeds in the area, green weeds will consistently attract fish. On large weed beds, where most of the weeds are brown, there'll often be isolated sporadic clumps of green weeds that concentrate fish. As the days get longer and light penetration increases come late ice, some dead weeds will often begin to rejuvenate and green up. Green weeds will often be taller, provide the best cover, and produce oxygen. As the shallows recharge with oxygen at late ice, look for panfish in whatever green weeds are present or high in the water column right under the ice. Weed beds that have a variety of weed varieties, like sago pondweed, cabbage, and coontail, are often the most productive. Weed beds that grow to the surface, where weed fragments get frozen into the ice, often rejuvenate the fastest at late ice. Lakes with excellent visibility often have the best weed beds because of better light penetration. Determining where these sweet spots are located can pay off huge dividends at late ice.
Another pumpkin seed. You know, a lot of times guys are asking me, where do you even start? And truly this winter, we're on a lake that I fished for the first time yesterday. We got out the map and looked up the lake finder map of it, and we found weeds. So we literally walked out from the access, found weeds, and started popping holes, and the gills are here, and they're where you'd expect them to be. Good tip is just truly look for the weed beds and start punching holes. Use that underwater camera to try to find some green weeds, and you're gonna find fish there. You know, fishing these bluegills up in the weeds like this, really all that we're using is just a little Northland jig, and I'm tipping it with a couple of waxworms. The waxworms seem to be going a little bit better over plastics right now for some of the bigger fish. So we're just putting on a gob of waxworms and trying to stay just above the weeds. The gills are definitely relating to the green color of the weeds, and those are the weeds that, you know, had oxygen a lot of the winter, and right now just above these gills are hanging out and they're hungry. Putting on the feed bag before the spawn kicks in here in hopefully a few weeks.
Finding panfish at late ice is often just a matter of connecting the dots.
I just love that.
By midwinter, many bluegills and crappies will suspend over deep holes and basins. But during the late ice period, the fish will migrate towards the shallow, weed-choked bays and coves where they will eventually spawn. Any break line or piece of structure that stands between the spawning areas and the wintering holes that has good weed growth can be an excellent location on late ice. On today's show, We identified large, shallow pencil reed beds as a good spawning location for panfish, and the fish were staging along the deeper weed beds that grew outside of the shallow reed beds. Productive depths ranged from between 5 and 8 feet of water, where weed growth grew about halfway up the water column. These locations are often productive right up until ice out, where the fish will push up even shallower. The tallest or thickest weeds almost always attract the most fish, so spend the time to find the best weed stands. When fish are moving and cruising through the weeds, focus on the edges and lanes where the fish can roam. If high sun, predators like bass or pike or fishing pressure push fish into the thick weeds, focus on fishing right in the thickest and tallest weeds.
There's a good fish. I've been just kind of hopping around in here. Oh, there's a nice dandy bluegill there. Don't you just love that orange breast on those nice fish? But something to consider when you're targeting fish that are in shallow and you have clear water is that typically if you have high sun, that'll push those fish deeper into those weeds. Predators like pike and bass will sometimes push these fish into weeds too, but this is just a perfect day. You can see behind me just kind of a gray overcast day, and when you get those low light, either mornings or evenings or low light where you have some cloud cover, these fish will just cruise, and that's just a perfect situation for finding fish in shallow water using weeds.
There we go. Here's another nice bluegill. You know, again, right on the edge of these weeds. These fish are coming out, getting ready for where they're going to stage to spawn, and this is your reward.
Here's a good fish. You know, I tell you what, when you do get this low light and these fish are just roaming around with packs, oh, there's a nice bluegill. You know, you'll see this happen a lot to where holes will just recharge. You'll catch some fish out of a hole, things will go a little quiet, bounce around a little bit, pick up a few more fish, but a lot of times you can go back to those old holes and they just recharge with fish. But these fish are just moving all over. I think they just follow the troughs, they follow the open lanes, the gaps in the weeds. A lot of times too, when you do have those aggressive fish that are roaming, you fish above the weeds and they'll come up out of the weeds or fish up in those open lanes. But yeah, that's fun. You don't have to move around so much when the fish move to you. And what I like to do when I'm fishing in weeds especially, is I like to use bigger profile lures. Reason being is that when you're using the low power mode on the Vexilar, you can tune out all the weeds, tune out all the clutter so you can see exactly where the fish are moving within the weeds, and then it's easier to see your lure. And so ironically, when you get in this shallow water and you're fishing right in the weeds, you know, the hexifly puts off a great signal, for example. That's got a very flat horizontal surface. Your smaller spoons, those are excellent lures, but don't be afraid to bulk up the profile of that lure when you're fishing these weeds, because they are effective.
There we go. Oh, nice pumpkin seed. You know, as we said, we've been fishing these weeds, and one of the keys and most overlooked tools, I think, a lot of times is using your Vexilar on low power mode. We know that there's weeds here, we found the weeds, and I can pick them up on my Vexilar when I turn it on, but what I'm doing is I'm turning it to low power mode, and it instantly just gets rid of the clutter, the weeds, and it allows me to see my jig, and it allows these fish to really show up without the interference of the weeds.
You know, when you go to a new body of water that you don't really know a lot about, here's a general rule of thumb that can help narrow down your search. When you drill holes, check to see if that water stains the ice or the snow around the hole. If you have a yellow or a brownish stain where you can see that water has some tint to it, typically you're not going to have as many weeds, and usually that means you're going to find fish relating to the basin in some capacity. They might be suspended over the basin or on the bottom but you're going to find fish relating to that soft, mucky bottom in the basin. Now, if you drill holes and the water's really clean, or there's good water visibility, typically that means you're going to have good weed growth, and that usually means you're going to push in shallower and find those weeds, and typically if there's weeds present in a body of water, they're going to hold your panfish. If those weeds aren't there, focus on the basin, but the water visibility can really help locate fish. There's a good fish there. When they come through, it's like 3 feet of solid fish on the Vex, but yeah, that's a dandy there. You know, and it's typical too, you know, come late ice, you'll catch everything on this pattern, you know, as far as shallow weeds. There'll be bass moving through here, pike, bluegills, crappies, you know, hybrid sunfish, pumpkin seeds, green sunfish. Everything's getting ready to push up into these shallow weeds and spawn, but yeah, that's a dandy. There we go. Another nice one. Get him wrapped around the cord here. You know, the other thing too in the shallow water is don't be afraid to work that lure down through the water column. Sometimes some of these fish have been right below the ice. That's pretty typical come late ice. Yeah, that's just a nice fish. There you go, get away.
There we go. You know, all that we're doing now is just kind of hopping around and kicking out some holes that were already drilled out here. But I mean, I've heard Jason say it for years, and we've seen it every year. Fish relate to the weeds, and when you can find weeds like this, you're going to find fish. And we've had bass, we've had northerns, crappies, and these bluegills are what we're trying to target, and we're definitely finding them just all the way along this weed bed. And as long as we keep moving, or if you sit, they seem to be schooling around quite a bit too, so this is what we're after. Boy, they're just stacked down here, right? There we go. Transducer. Boy, you know, what we've really done here is we located the weeds. Obviously we can see them standing here, but then we dropped the Vexilar camera down and we confirmed that indeed they were green weeds. Those green weeds are so important right now, and with as long of a winter as we've had, these fish are relating to them. And once we can confirm that, hey, we had weeds down there, we've got green weeds, even if we hadn't seen fish instantly on the camera, it would have been an area that I would have set up on knowing that fish are going to be here. We saw the green weeds and we saw the fish were sitting right above them, so we knew we were going to be in them, and we've been having a blast hopping around catching fish.
On today's show, we've really talked about the importance of finding weeds and really getting an intimate understanding of the area that you're fishing. If you ever get the opportunity, if you know you're going to be targeting a specific body of water, get out on that body of water in the fall and do your homework. That'll pay huge dividends once this lake freezes over. A lot of times I just like to get out in the area with polarized sunglasses, get up in that shallow water, get up where those weeds are, and just look and learn. And you can see where the bulrushes are, you can see where the cabbage is, you can see where the coontail is, you see where the openings are, the edges, the breaks, either by using your electronics or by looking into the water. And the more information that you have and the better understanding that you have of the spots, the better that you can fish them. And that really can start in the fall. You can learn these areas through the ice, but it takes a lot more work and a lot more time. And so you can take a shortcut by coming out here during the open water season and doing that recon work. And a lot of times you can get creative with it. When you find different types of situations or different types of structure, if you will, that might hold fish later on. Say it's a break, say it's a dip, say it's a trough, an opening in the weeds, different types of weeds, maybe taller stands of weeds. Mark it with your GPS and use a different type of symbol for every type of structure. For example, say a really tall, thick, dense weed bed, use a symbol for that. An opening, a lane, a spot where the weeds stop, use a symbol for that. The dips, the troughs, a lot of times that'll be on a lake chip, but if the lake isn't marked out very well or mapped out very well, use a symbol for the dips and the troughs, and mark it out And that way you've got that information, so when this lake freezes over, you can just walk out and start fishing and start catching. Neat thing about these cameras is you can tell what direction the camera lens is pointing, and you can just slowly turn that camera lens just to really see what's going on. But there's some nice coon tails sticking up. It just gives you that visual picture. When these weeds are green, they really stand out. Most of the weeds are going to look yellow and brown. There's some more weeds right here. There's a couple of different ways you can rig up this camera. I'm lowering this lens down where I'm shooting straight out, and I'm turning the lens back and forth just to look around. But you can also do what's called down viewing, where you can just hang the lens straight down and drop it down fast. It just gives you a fast look straight down. A lot of times it's clear water. You only have to drop it down just a little ways below the hole and get a pretty good reading that way as well. But cameras really allow you to really break down an area and really give you a good understanding of exactly what you're fishing.
Underwater cameras, like the Vexilar Scout, is an invaluable tool for evaluating and finding the best locations. When using a camera to identify green weeds, weeds are the easiest to identify during the middle of the day with excellent light penetration. Some stalks and leaves will look vibrant if using an underwater camera. The key is not to expect or look for too much. Just a handful of green stalks or a clump of greening leaves will be a fish magnet. If looking for weeds by sight fishing or looking down the hole, look for the dark or black appearing weeds. The dead weeds will often look yellow. Crappies are notorious for cruising right under the ice, especially near or around stands of green weeds. When using a camera to fine-tune the location, always look right under the ice, as these fish are often easy to see with a camera.
There we go. Another crappie. You know, that fish was right underneath the ice again. These fish are cruising maybe 6-8 inches underneath the ice. Late ice, it's not uncommon to see them do that, but what a blast when you drop it down and your jig just stops and you can set the hook. Wow, nice fish.
Oh, there's a fish there. You know, I tell you what, even on lakes where you do have a lot of weeds, a lot of the weeds are going to be brown and down come late ice, and so put in the work to find those green stands, and I tell you what, that is going to really concentrate the fish come late ice. And you know, this is just going to keep getting better and better. I mean, we probably have a couple weeks of ice fishing left ahead of us, and that ice gets rotten, these fish are just going to keep pushing up into those green weeds.
To find out more information on Jason Mitchell Outdoors, make their official webpage one of your favorite pages. Find out upcoming show schedules and air times, along with past shows, article and product reviews at jasonmitchelloutdoors.com. Great information on the outdoors is just one click away.